Right. All right. Well, hi, everyone. In case you don't know me yet, I'm Dr. Kimberly Campbell. I am seeing a couple of familiar faces, so I think I've had a couple of you in classes before, so that's nice. So today is just going to be me kind of giving you the usual like day one breakdown of what's in the course. I'm also recording this for those who aren't able to be here or who join in the class later on, that sort of thing. So I'll just be posting my audio and my screen capture for that. Because I know not everybody makes it to the first day of classes. It has also been a little bit of a chaotic year yet again. I guess we're all kind of getting used to that, but the super last minute nature of being switched to online for an unknown amount of time has been really exciting. So as of right now, we're going to be doing sort of these optional Zoom meetings where we can chit chat about stuff, or today go through some of the important info. And then sort of moving forward, you don't have to come to these if you're not interested, if you don't have any questions. Everything will just be posted on eClass. So that'll kind of get us through the online portion, however long that lasts, because you guys have as much info as I do on that matter. But I think the first thing that I want to do today is start off with screen sharing. Make sure I share the right screen. Oh, nope, I'm already at practice with this. There we go. Screen number 2. And then what I typically do on my first day in a class is I actually have some slides that I go over, just sort of the basics of the course, getting us started, and then we'll transition over into eClass as well as the syllabus, just where we'll hit those high points. Because it's a 300 level class. You guys have seen syllabi before. We don't have to spend tons of time with it, but I'd at least like to hit some of it. So this is PSYCO 381. I will give you a heads up. I am teaching a couple of classes this semester, so make sure you include that course code in any email correspondences. Otherwise, if you're asking questions, I might have to then reply and say, what class are you asking about, before I can give you a real answer, and that just wastes a bunch of your time. So let me know where you're from so that I know how to proceed. And my usual thing is I like to start talking a little bit about myself, because I really like pushing the idea of thinking critically about where information is coming from. So who is this random person who's teaching this course? What are my credentials that make me a viable source of information, even if I am just sort of regurgitating information from a textbook and some other sources? So I start off with the usual, the academic background stuff. When I was an undergrad, I never understood the point of this because my instructors never said why they did it. And I'm like, okay, I guess you can show off your degrees, but it's actually more of a, this is what my experience is. This is what I've done research-wise and learning-wise. So this is why I'm a reasonable source, theoretically. So I got my Bachelor of Science actually in biology at Dalhousie University. So my background early on was biology. I technically started out in physics, but very quickly realized that numbers are not my forte. And you might notice as we go through the class, if there's anything with numbers, I tend to say them backwards. So what's on the slide is more often accurate than what I say. Hence, no physics. But I did quite a bit of biology type research. I did a lot of genetic stuff. I really enjoyed evolution. I dabbled a little bit in ecology due to availability of classes, but that's sort of my original background. And then I took some time off. I actually worked with the federal government for a little while. I helped with cleaning up lighthouse sites. So that was kind of interesting. I did a little bit of that. And then I decided I wanted to go back to school. So I came out to Alberta and I started my master's. So I've been working with Dr. Sturdy since 2015. So I did my master's and my PhD in that lab. And so I switched completely from my undergrad research, which was sort of single-celled organisms and looking at their genomes, to looking at communication in songbirds. So a complete deviation from what I had done. But just to show people that you might not always know where you're going to end up when you start, because birds and communication is very different from my start in physics. So just a little bit out there. But that also means that I have sort of a little bit of experience in a lot of different areas. So I like to bring in some of that understanding as we move through the course, especially with something like principles of learning, where we get to talk about, you know, a little bit of bio stuff, but also the psych stuff and a little bit of neuro stuff. So we bring it all together. I've also, since I've been doing the online teaching thing for a while, it's very difficult to get a feel for an instructor's personality. It's just going to be my voice over some PowerPoint slides for quite a while. And that's not exactly the best way to get a feel for someone. So I've started including me as a person, not just an academic. So you're going to pick up very, very quickly. I absolutely love birds. I research birds. I have birds. I have 2 in the picture here. I technically have 3 right now. Which has made the online learning thing a little bit difficult, because if you've ever had birds, you know that they are not quiet creatures. And one of them is a sun conure. So I have very good filters, so you very rarely hear them, but they will occasionally come through. And especially the yellow one, she likes to sit on the microphone, which is just exactly what I want. But I just give that heads up because they might make an auditory appearance. They might come in on some of my videos, just giving people a heads up, not to be surprised if they appear. I absolutely love chocolate. That's my favorite snack. And that's probably a bad thing to keep at my desk when I'm sitting here all day, every day, but that's what's in the background. I do a lot of photography. That's because I used to do a lot of artwork, but that's too time consuming. So photography was a nice way to be creative without actually having to do the time-consuming part. I have been a Pokemon fan since I was a small child, and I still avidly play the games, despite being much, much older than the sort of preferred demographic for them. And I have lots of hobbies, so whenever I manage to have time, I like doing other stuff. So I like being able to to try new things and to sort of do whatever comes to mind. I like the comments that other people also play Pokemon. That makes me very happy. All right. So that's just a little bit about me. You'll kind of get a little bit of a feel for my personality as I teach, because as I said, the online stuff, it can be really dull. So I like to inject just a little bit of personality as much as I can. And I like to give you guys warnings that something is being included because of interest rather than like, you need to memorize this. So I'm very good at adding in little FYI notes or just verbally telling you that I think it's cool and you don't have to know it. So those will come up as we go through. And so I already kind of hinted at where my research background was. The technical terminology for my undergrad research was I was doing sequencing of DNA in single-celled organisms that I had extracted from soil samples. So super exciting stuff. As a graduate researcher, I looked at learning and communication in black-capped chickadees. So I've done everything from bioacoustic analyses, breaking down their vocalizations, to operant conditioning, which is very relevant for this class. I'll actually be doing a mini aside on operant conditioning in black-capped chickadees, because I can actually show you what it looks like and kind of talk about some of the projects I've done. So that makes it a little bit more personalized. But that's just the general gist of it. Oh, and I did include a special highlight because, you know, more cute birds is always a good thing. So just in case you're wondering, so I have 2 green cheeks. So this guy here, this is Link, he's a green cheek. And this is Starbuck, he is also a green cheek. He's just a slightly different color morph. And him and Link get along. Our sun conure, Chic, does not get along with this green cheek, just to make it all complex. So you usually only see 1 or 2 at a time because I have to separate them. You'd think somebody teaching principles of learning would be really good at training birds, but not so far. They've trained me, but not so much the other way around. But maybe by the end of the course, I'll have pictures of all 3 together that I can be very excited about. All right. And then the last sort of self-indulgent portion of this beginning is talking a little bit about my teaching philosophy. And again, I really like transparency and telling you guys why I do things, because otherwise you have no idea what's going on. So I acknowledge that online learning is, I guess, it's less new now. We've been doing it for a while, but it's still weird and different. And there's lots of stuff and transitions. There's going to be a learning curve. I have experienced a lot of things having gone wrong. I was in the first wave that got pushed online with very little warning the first time. I've written exams through site crashes. I've had my textbook sites go down. Like, if it can happen, it's happened. And so my approach to that is stuff's going to go wrong. We'll find a way through it. So don't panic if you run into issues. I have seen many, many, many issues. And that's why I always try and set aside windows to just sit with you guys, like when you're writing exams or whatever. So I'm available. So don't panic. We're in it together. And I know that sounds ridiculous and overdone, but yeah. I also like having accessible materials. So you may have noticed at this point that I have some of the most boring slides on the planet. They are plain black and white. And the reason for that is actually that I've had students in classes that need high contrast to see. So if you have like brightly colored backgrounds or funky colored letters, it gets very difficult to distinguish. And if you are someone who has an issue with that, you might know that a lot of textbooks, and especially their figures, seem to be specifically designed to not work with color blindness. So I try and do my best to either redo those or adjust the contrast, keep my slides simple so that we don't have that problem. So I'm always looking for ways to make things just a little bit more accessible and less painful to look at. So yes, they are very boring, but it's an intentional boring. And my last thing is that I like to give you guys lots of resources. You've kind of picked up on that. I like to give examples and sort of bring in interesting aspects to make things connect. So try and make use of the resources that are available to you. We're going to have these weekly Zoom meetings until we're able to return to in-person lectures. And even after we do the return to in-person, sort of when that happens, I'd still be available for Zoom meetings because I know not everyone wants to be on campus. And I've specifically shaped as much of the course towards that as possible. I also like including videos and extra links. So if I talk about something and I'm like, oh, I saw a really cool YouTube video that illustrates this really well, I'll typically link you to that. So those are going to be there. I typically don't test directly from the included videos. They're just like a different perspective on what I've already taught, because coming at it from a different angle can be helpful. And I always encourage you to reach out to either myself or our TA. Andreas is a fantastic student, and he has lots of experience with learning and behavior. So he's going to be a great resource. So if you wanted to either email us, come to these meetings, or make use of the general forum on eClass, which is just a place where you can dump questions so that everyone can see them, it's a great way to get questions answered. And do that earlier rather than later. There's always a select group of students who send tons of emails the night before an exam, and that is not the optimal time to learn some of this complex information. So if you have something that's not quite sticking early on, definitely come and chat about it with me, because we just build on stuff and I don't want you to get lost. Okay, so that is all about me and the course. Another thing that if you've had me as an instructor before, you've probably seen, so I'll just do it very quickly. But I, again, found that being an undergrad, there's some information that people just assume that you have that you don't necessarily have. And one of these is, how do you talk to people in academia? Because I've had those instructors who get really nitpicky about what you call them and how you address them and how you interact with them. And Clearly, I'm less so on that wavelength, but I do know that there are still people who are like that. So I include just a very brief breakdown of some of the different titles that you are going to see in academia and how the heck you're supposed to tell the difference. So the big ones are, do you call someone doctor or professor or instructor? And sometimes all of the above or none of the above, which is just fantastic. But for our basic instructions, doctor is going to be somebody who has a PhD or an MD. At the university, you're mostly going to interact with PhDs. So if somebody's email signature or their web page has their name followed by PhD, you would be a-okay to call them doctor, their last name. So for me, you could call me Dr. Campbell because that's what's listed on all of my documentation. Professor is going to be someone, usually a doctor, who's been hired as a professor. So professor is technically a job title. And so if somebody is listed as a professor of science, then you could call them professor, their last name. And usually you could sort of alternate between doctor, their last name, professor, their last name. Most of them won't have a preference, but sometimes they will. And I'll give you a little hint about how to identify that in a second. But yeah, so you would specifically check their, probably their course listing, or if you go to the U of A, find a person, it'll list their job title. So for me, I'm not actually hired as a professor. I am an instructor. I am a sessional instructor, I think is my most recent job title. And that's just someone who isn't a professor, but is teaching a course. And you don't have that specification that you also have to be a doctor. So someone with an MSc might be an instructor. And you might find that some of your classes are being taught by PhD candidates. So students who are in the process of getting their PhDs. You could call them instructor and still be correct. And then for those who are visual learners, because words don't always work for everyone, I made a Venn diagram. Doctors are going to be the people with PhDs. Professors are usually going to also be people you would call doctor. So that's why those two are sort of layered like this. And then instructor, you may have a PhD or you may not. And so that little purple dot there is me, because you could safely call me instructor or doctor and be perfectly fine with that. And for that little hint as to figuring out what people prefer to be called, usually when I send an email, I go with what is the correct title. So if you're emailing me, you might want to start with Dr. Campbell. And then you look at how do they respond to that email? What's their sign off at the bottom? And if somebody likes the title that you've used, they'll usually keep using that title. So it would be sincerely Dr. Campbell. For myself, I usually switch over to just using my first name. So I would sign my emails Kimberly. And that would be me saying that I'm okay with you calling me by my first name. And so you can use that trick pretty safely in academia and in other places, just as a hint of what you should be calling people. And it's, again, a little bit of a weird aside, but having worked with academics and professionals, it's something that you're never explicitly told, but you are expected to know. So I include a blurb about it at the beginning of all of my classes. So if you didn't know, you now do. Oh, and then I had given an example using my supervisor, Dr. Sturdy. So here I've just sort of highlighted a couple of our hints if we wanted to figure out how to address Dr. Sturdy. So he's got a PhD, we could call him Dr. Sturdy. And he's also hired as a professor of science. So we could call him Professor Sturdy, and both would be fine. Having interacted with him, I have had enough emails that have been signed just Chris. So I worked with him long enough that it's okay for me to call him that. But if you haven't before, I'd start with Dr. Sturdy. And that's just the quick way of doing it. And you can look up pretty much anybody on the sort of faculty website, which is pretty nice. All right, so that's all of the little stuff out of the way. Now we can get into the course proper. And some of this we'll have covered already because I tend not to stick to topics well, but that's all right. So most of this information is going to be coming from either eClass or our syllabus or both. I like to try and give you the information in lots of different places, mostly because I find that students are looking for things and aren't quite sure where to find it. So if I put it everywhere, then it increases the odds of finding. But eClass is going to be our main source of information for the course. So I've hopefully got to the point where our eClass is set up pretty logically. Sometimes, especially at the beginning of the semester, stuff might not be set up quite right. So if you ever notice an issue or an inconsistency, just send me an email and ask about it, because I've already had somebody point out something in one of my classes where I had switched the days. So it was supposed to be like 31 and I had written it as 13, which again happens. So on our eClass, you should at this point be able to see our syllabus, an announcements tab, and a frequently asked questions section. If I get a question asked enough times, I'll stick a separate thing for it in the frequently asked questions. But for the most part, we do a pretty good job. For the announcements, you are going to be auto-subscribed to that. So if ever I make an announcement, it will go to your U of A inbox. So just keep an eye on that. And that's great for stuff like, you know, maybe something has happened, maybe a site is down or whatever. I'll send you information that way. I also like to give you a heads up as a reminder of stuff that's upcoming and things like that. So the announcements are a great place to get that info. It's also going to have all of our resources for the course assessments, links to examinations, as well as our videos for lecture and the slides. And if you've read through our syllabus already, you might have noticed that it's written as an in-person class still, because it's still technically on paper an in-person class. We're just temporarily online, so I'll tell you how we're sort of shifting those things. But the information is still going to be in the same places, whether we're in person or not. So not to worry. All right. So while we're stuck online, I have set up to use asynchronous delivery just because of the issues I mentioned with having multiple birds in a small apartment. They tend not to like sitting quietly for an hour or more at a time. So I taught a stats class last semester that we did live, and I did an entire lecture with a bird sitting across my glasses, which is a little bit distracting on both sides. So that's sort of one of those reasons. And if you don't have birds, then you might be like, why don't they just stay in their cage? And that's just so much louder. But yeah, so I'm going to pre-record my lectures and then show up for these live Zooms every one of our scheduled class times in case you have questions. So if you've watched the lecture and you're like, hey, I don't get this topic, we can go over it. We can chat about it. We can do stuff like that. Okay, sorry, I can't multitask. So I just got a question, but I'm going to finish this first and then I'll hop back to the question. So I'm going to post to YouTube with a link on eClass so that you can click over to the YouTube site, and that'll get you access to everything that way. And then I post all the slides on eClass as both PowerPoint slides and PDFs, because some students prefer one or the other. So that's always going to be there. And I typically put the slides up in advance of a class, though that's more done because students like having them. As a side note, there's quite a few studies that actually show that you're a lot better off if you go through the class without the notes the first time and make your own, and then add them into the lectures, just as a slight aside. But I know that some students love having them and it saves time, so they're there. And so the question I got was, how is stuff going to change when we go back in person? Basically, I have invested in a bunch of stuff in order to bring my laptop to class. I have a lapel mic and I have a screen capture program all set up. So basically what I'll be doing is exactly what I do for my online lectures, where I record my screen and have my microphone, except I'll be doing it in the classroom. So I've been doing this at another university where I bring in my laptop, I screen record what I have on the sort of overhead for you guys, and I just capture that and save it raw to YouTube when I'm done. So it's going to be basically the same thing. It's just going to be a little bit less polished because I won't edit. It'll just be me talking at the class. But by being able to do that, that means that if you don't want to be on campus, if you don't want to be in the classroom when we're in the classroom, you don't have to be. So you will have the slides and the audio that goes along with it, just as if you were in the classroom. I also find that it's just really nice for students to have that, even if they do come to class, because sometimes you want to listen to it again. Or maybe you want to make use of the fact that YouTube does subtitles and you can download the transcripts for the video, which is really helpful as a former student and someone who continually listens to lectures, definitely a useful aspect. So lots of reasons for doing that, but it's going to be very similar whether we're in person or online, and that is intentional. All right. Oh, too far. All right. And so for our temporary live meetings, you are in them. This is a temporary live meeting. So these are going to go on as long as we don't have physical classes during this period. Again, I just want to give you guys the option to show up during the class period, interact with myself and other people in the class, ask questions, whatever. Because I found that when I first shifted to online and we didn't have sort of live interactions, it's really boring and it's really hard to stay motivated. And some people just feel awkward asking questions. So this is meant to be just more of a welcoming space. So you've clearly found the Zoom link on eClass under that live meeting section. You don't have to attend these if you already watched the videos and you get everything. Don't worry about it. I specifically set it up so that I'm not here for the full class period. I have the full class period set aside. I specifically schedule it off, but I do find that attendance tends to sort of drop out. So if there's no one here, if no one has questions, after 15 minutes, I'll sign out. If there are tons of people and we're having a really good discussion, I will stick around for the full hour and a half. I have no issue with that at all. I just don't want to sit here by myself for an hour and a half, which I did the first semester I employed this before I added that caveat. So we're benefiting from past knowledge here. But yeah, so there's going to be these optional meetings. If you want to come, you can. If not, not to worry. Okay, so I think that was everything in the slides. And I think I mentioned already, those slides are up on our eClass. So you have access to these if for whatever reason you want this information, even though, again, it will be in our eClass and the syllabus and so on and so forth. So I am going to switch over and still showing the screen. Perfect. So this is our eClass. It might look just a little bit different because it's the instructor view, not the student view. I put it on student view earlier, but then it wouldn't let me into Zoom, and I am just not messing with that. So if you haven't seen it, this is what our eClass looks like. I believe everything's accurate here. I have links to both myself and our teaching assistant. I mentioned Andreas is our teaching assistant. We both have a couple of different emails that will go to the same account. So you can use whatever one happens to be handy. So you can use the one that's on our eClass or on the syllabus, or if you happen to see another one when you start typing our names into your email, those are all fine. I just give the caveat that there is another Kim Campbell on campus. So make sure that it's me, Kim Campbell, and not her, Kim Campbell, because she is the former Prime Minister of Canada. And so she comes up first because I guess she's a little bit more important. So that's why I include a picture in my sort of ID thing. So just be aware of that because we occasionally meet up and exchange emails back. So I've been invited to dinners, she's been asked questions about exams, and then we trade. But yeah, so this is our announcements, our syllabus. I can actually pull over our syllabus here. So this is the document that you will have gone through. It's a fairly standard syllabus document. It just lists our information for the class, talks a little bit about the lectures, evaluations. So I guess we can do that now. Again, I wanted to set stuff up so that I could have as much online as possible while also giving the option of having in-person stuff. So most of our evaluations are going to be conducted online. But that being said, if say you wanted to write the exam during class time, and maybe you want to write it during class time, like in class, I will go to campus if we're allowed on campus, and I'll be in the room if you wanted to come and write it sort of in person on your own laptop. Again, I know that some people like having that physical presence, and other people want nothing to do with that physical presence right now. So I'm trying to be as flexible as possible. So I'll explain it in more detail as we get closer to the exams, because theoretically we'll be back in person, but we're not sure. But all of the exams are set up to run through eClass. There's a whole bunch of different reasons for this, but the big ones are when I switched back to using paper tests, it's really hard to do exam viewings, especially in larger classes. Like, how do you viably put together a way that 100 people can physically get to their exams? And it's not really possible. So my approach is, with the online eClass exams, I actually open them up after they've been graded, and I let you guys see the questions. And that way you can get some feedback, you can learn from any potential mistakes, and you can see what you did. So I really, really liked that aspect of online learning, and I wanted to keep going with it. So it just sort of makes it a little bit more convenient as well if we happen to also still be online at that point. So that's why I'm running the midterms through eClass. The one thing is, I'm not able to do that with the final exams because those are set by the Office of the Registrar. And so for an in-person class, they determine the date and the time of an exam. So we have to wait on their say of when and where. But whatever I had control over, I tried to make a little bit more flexible. So for most of this, I'm going to skim through. Like I said, you're far enough along in your careers that you've seen a syllabus before. I would recommend skimming through this for the important information, but I'm going to stop and sort of hit some of the important factors here. So our textbook is the Principles of Learning and Behavior, 7th edition, this one here. So this is the same one that's been used for a while. I always tell people that it's listed as a required textbook, but if you're not the kind of person that uses a textbook, you can get by without it. I just find that it's actually a very useful textbook. So I read it, that's what I used to teach from. But if you find that you do really well with just verbal lectures, then you can get by without it. There isn't anything in it that's sort of required for grades or anything like that. So just to be transparent. I also just had another couple of questions here. Let me scroll so I don't lose them. Yes, I talked to the department about how it works and whether or not I could have an online exam, and I can't. It's not something that the department or the instructors determine. It's determined at the faculty level. So if something is listed as an in-person class, the final exam is automatically in person. And again, there's sort of an asterisk there, as if we're allowed to be in person. Yeah, and so the final exam will be a paper exam in person wherever the registrar tells us we're supposed to be. Right, okay, and then I had another question about chapter quizzes. So chapter quizzes are going to be based on, they're going to come from the textbook, but I also base my lectures on the textbook. So it's not like I would ask questions about stuff that I've deemed not worth talking about, if that kind of makes sense. So I typically read through the textbook and decide what's important. What do I think needs to be focused on? And maybe I'll add a little bit to it. I'll add some examples, talk about other aspects. And then when I make the questions, and this goes for the exams as well, they're going to be coming from the textbook, but I'm a lot more likely to ask you questions about stuff that I think is important. So there's a pretty big overlap between what we talk about in lecture versus what's actually asked questions about. Okay, let me go back up here. Sorry, lots of different questions. Okay, so is the course going to be mostly online except for the final being in person? Not necessarily. So I will be lecturing in person as soon as the university opens up to allow that. So right now, we're stuck online until the last week of January, I believe. But if it's determined that we can go back on campus, then I will be lecturing in the classroom And like I said, I'll just be recording it for people who don't want to come in. So if you really like that in-class experience, I will be in the classroom. I will be there to answer questions. I typically end my classes a couple minutes early so that we can sit around and chat afterwards. I like that whole experience. We just don't have that option right now. And like I said, the midterms are going to be written through eClass, but if you want to write it while you're sitting in the classroom so you can ask me questions, I'll be there for that too. So I will be in the classroom for the class periods, sort of when that is available. But I'm also giving you sort of, we'll get to it in a moment here, but the exams, you have a full window to write in. That window includes our class time, but also gives you extra time if you need it. Okay. All right. And so if we go back fully online, then the exams will be online, yes. And the final will be open book, yes, as well. I'm not quite sure the mechanism of doing open book. I have found in other classes that having a fully open book exam is actually annoying because people flip through their pages. And not everyone has a physical copy of the textbook. So what I think I would do for an in-person final exam would say that you can have like a cheat sheet, a double-sided cheat sheet, and you can put whatever you want on it. That would probably be a good alternative. So that's what I'm thinking, but I haven't made any solid decisions because who knows, in a week we might have a completely different plan. And that kind of goes back to the online learning is new and ever changing. So yeah. Okay, I think I got that. I think I managed to get all of those comments there. Okay. All right. Yeah, I have to do one thing at a time or else I meander off topic quite drastically. Okay, so we talked about the textbook and okay, so we have our lecture schedule. So this is the plan. As we've all figured out by now, sometimes things happen and the plan doesn't quite work out. I've timed it fairly well, and I typically do okay with this sort of number of days per topic. We might sort of carry over a little bit or have extra time, depending. I'll just keep you guys posted. What I typically do on eClass is as I've posted topics, because I will usually break down the sort of lecture videos into more manageable pieces, like say half an hour to an hour at a time instead of like an hour and a half. And then I'll just tell you how many parts for each chapter so you know what should be covered when. And I typically time it out with the intention of having the 80 minutes per day of teaching. So I would just say that, you know, this portion of the lecture is intended for this day and that portion is intended for the other day, just so that you kind of know what the plan is. But I'll stick pretty well to this lecture schedule. Oh, and there was another question here. Midterm and quizzes are open book. Is there any written? Yes. So yes, everything is open book. Yes, there are going to be written responses. And there'll be sort of the specifics of those breakdowns for each component. So if you head to our eClass and you can look at what are the exams, what are the midterms, what do they cover, how many questions, that sort of thing, it's all already listed. Okay, so these are our main components. We have 2 midterms. We're going to have 2 assignments, and then we have chapter quizzes and a final exam. So the assignments are going to be something that we talk about sort of as we move into the semester. I haven't 100% decided what I'm doing quite yet, but it's going to be something to do with reading some kind of scientific article and showing that you understand the topic. So can you think critically about a concept? And I typically keep them very short because, again, it is just Andreas and myself for a class of over 100, so we don't want to read a whole bunch. So usually I aim for like a 1 to 2 page assignment. So when you see written assignment, don't immediately panic. It's usually like 2 pages double spaced. So not meant to be breaking your spirits. And so those are due later on in the semester. So not until the beginning of March and then the beginning of April. And again, I like to spread stuff out to give you some time to get settled. So I'll be doing that as well. So the details for that will show up and I'll let you know when it shows up. There's going to be chapter quizzes, so I'm going to include a mixture of multiple choice, maybe some true false, maybe some fill in the blank questions, all through eClass. So you should be able to see the first set of those. They're going to be mostly multiple choice to begin with, just because the early chapters are very basic. We're just getting our sort of toes in the water at the beginning. So we'll eventually work in some other kinds of questions, but I'll give you a heads up when I'm doing it. And I write it in that sort of I will post the chapter quizzes as I post the material, but I was able to get a bunch of stuff done over the break because I was stuck in bed anyways. So I put together the first 4 quizzes. So if you wanted to work ahead, you can do that. But I will, at the very latest, be posting them at the same time as the lecture material. So I may not be as on the ball as the semester goes on. Okay, I just had a couple other questions pop up. Okay, so what other classes am I teaching this semester? I am doing a 105, so an intro on the art side, and then I'm also doing 481, which is the next portion of this class. So it'll be the next bit of learning and behavior. And it's a comparative cognition discussion course. So it's a seminar, which is a really cool one. So occasionally I will bring some of the really neat research that we talk about in that class back over to this one, again, just because it's really cool. And I'll give you the flag of just for your information, you don't have to know it. It's just neat. And then someone had asked about the readings. Are all of the pages assigned, including the boxes and whatnot? The best way to read the textbook is actually to go through it and use it as a supplement to what we cover in lecture. So like I said before, I'm going to focus on the stuff that I think is most important. So if I completely skip a topic in a chapter, it's usually because I don't think it's very important, or I think it's sort of unhelpful, or we're not going to need it to build on for the rest of the course. So you might be better off say looking at the lecture notes and going, oh, okay, we talk about this topic a lot. I want to read this a lot and make sure I know it really well. Textbooks work differently for different people. As a student, I was that person who used my textbooks to sort of keep my desk level. I did not love reading them until I was a grad student when I learned how to read them. So I'm not the best at, textbook reading suggestions. Nowadays, when I read a textbook, I'm looking for information that would be used for a test or a lecture. And that's actually a really good approach as a student as well, which is where I first learned it as a grad student, where if you read it and go, these concepts are set up very much like a multiple choice question, or this would be a great short answer question. You can kind of start tricking your brain into studying as you go, which is kind of nice. Will there be unique questions on the exam for the textbook only, or will they be mainly covered in both? It's going to be mainly both. Like I said, it's going to be, I focus on the stuff that's most important, and I'm going to ask questions about the stuff that's most important. So if it was a Venn diagram, it's almost completely overlapped. There's occasionally a question that isn't sort of directly addressed in class, but it's something you could figure out from the lecture. Those might appear, that might have been sort of talked about as an example in the text, but that's mostly as far as it'll go. Okay, so got that. The chapter quizzes, those are up. You can see those now. So the midterms, we already kind of touched on those. They're going to be on eClass, and they're going to be on eClass whether we're in person or online for the reasons I mentioned before. They're going to be mostly multiple choice questions with a couple of short answer questions. And my rationale behind this is I've had a bunch of students who've made it all the way through their undergrad degrees with zero experience writing. And I find that writing is sort of a better way to express what you actually understand. I especially like some open-ended or opinion type questions to get you to really think about a concept. So you can expect a few of those. I'll typically sort of drop hints fairly heavily as we go through lecture for which topics are questionable. But you'll get a feel for it fairly quickly. And I'll usually let you know sort of how much I'm expecting you to write. For questions, if I tell you it's worth 2 points, I'm usually asking for you to make 2 statements. So tell me what it is and why it's important, or something like that. Or if I'm asking you to compare 2 things, maybe give me 2 points of comparison. And I'll specifically say that in the instructions for the exams as well. So the midterms are going to be on eClass. And like I said, I'm giving you guys a window. So I'm going to have them open from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. And so that means that I will be sitting at my computer for that window in order to answer any questions. Because sometimes students run into issues. Maybe you're reading a question and it's not quite making sense. You can send me an email and I typically get back to people in under 5 minutes. Sometimes the servers are a little bit slow, but I'm here all day for those. If we are back to in person, what I'll be doing is bringing my laptop to the classroom, and I will be sitting in the classroom with my laptop so I can answer questions during that window. So I will always be available no matter the circumstances. And they're going to be 80 minutes long, so you have 80 minutes to complete it during that window. And again, all of those bits of information are reiterated on our eClass because I've actually already set up our midterms. So you can see the 2 midterms that we have. The final exam, like I said, we're kind of stuck waiting to see when the Office of the Registrar schedules it. Last semester, they took their dear sweet time. So you might not actually see a final exam date until last semester, it was late November. So potentially the end of March. You will get a tentative exam date, usually about halfway through the semester. They do occasionally change. So once it's tentatively released, then you can sort of start planning around that, but don't make any hard plans until they tell us for sure. Again, just experience where they've moved things, and it's not super great. And then the final exam is basically going to be a longer version of the midterms, and they're going to be cumulative. I guess the midterms are non-cumulative, so I'll just test you on new stuff for the midterms, and then the final exam will be everything. And I typically do like a 70-30 split, so 70% would be new stuff, so whatever we've covered since the second midterm, and then the earlier stuff would just be the remaining 30%. So typically up to 5 questions per chapter is usually what you'll see. And that way I focus in on what's really important, or I ask you questions that make you understand multiple chapters, because those are really nice. But I use the same format, the same setup typically for the midterms and the final. Just if it's in person, it'll be on paper instead of a computer. I have also already posted practice exams. Again, I was a little bit ahead of prepping some things, so you actually have access to the practice exams already. So that's mostly there just to let you sort of trial and error your way through how exams function on eClass. At this point, you've probably used eClass and used quizzes on eClass through that, but I always give people the option to troubleshoot, and you can do it as many times as you want. The practice exams aren't worth anything. They're just sort of there to give you a chance to see what kind of questions I might ask, while also knowing that I specifically won't ask the questions that you've been given. And then for the other usual stuff, for missing things, if it's something like a quiz or an assignment, if you can get in touch with me within 24 hours in advance is going to be better. But if you can give me a heads up if something's going on, I will make some kind of arrangement. So usually if you get in touch with me like the week before and say, hey, something has come up, I physically can't do this, maybe you're sick, maybe something has gone wrong and your computer is on fire, whatever. Just let me know, and then we'll push the date by whatever is reasonable. If you missed a deadline, you have 24 hours to get in touch. Of course, if it's some sort of emergency where you physically couldn't, I also understand that. Things happen. But let me know as soon as possible, and in advance, I'm a lot more likely to be flexible. For exams, with the midterm exams, if you've missed a midterm, in order to not hold up everybody else's grades, I actually don't offer rewrites for midterms. So if you have to miss a midterm and it's for a reasonable reason, then we'll just defer the weight to the final exam. So that way there's no panic of trying to reschedule a bunch of different things, because especially nowadays, there's a lot of rescheduling that would be required. So we just do a deferral that way. And then for the final exams, the deferral process is a little bit more intensive, again, because the final exams are run by the faculty. So instructors aren't really involved in deferring finals. You have to go through your faculty to request an official deferral, but it gives you all the information there in the syllabus. Okay, so I think that's a pretty long-winded Coles Notes version of what's in here. There's a bunch of useful links in the syllabus. Again, you've probably read these through before, but if you haven't, skim over it. There's lots of links for safe things on the COVID-19 information, student information, accessibility resources, all of these things. These are all here for you. And if you have any questions about any of that stuff, let me know. But that should be most of the information that you need. And then I've also taken a lot of that information and I've moved it straight over into our eClass. So there's lots of redundancies, but you'll find things like this is directly from our syllabus. The email policy here is going to be almost exactly from our syllabus. You're going to find, I guess, well, here's the day one information linked to the textbook stuff and then the slides. This is an old version of our mind taps, which is why it's hidden. I'm trying to find out if there's a new one or not, or if I'm pointing you to the old, but I will fill you guys in once I know the answer to that. You have the examinations, including practices and the links to the exams. So these are all set up here. I'll let you know if anything changes with them, but that should be pretty good. And you can actually click in and see when the windows are available and stuff like that. Chapter quizzes, like I said, those are here. I think I changed the times on everything, so those should all be good. So eClass is going to be a very useful resource. Let me close some of these up. And then again, not all of these are going to be visible quite yet because I haven't populated these things yet, but our first week worth of information is here. So I have a video of me going over the slides, the content for chapter 1, the slides that you guys have, and then also an extra video that might help as a reminder of Pavlov and classical conditioning stuff. Okay, let me just double check I got everything. Yeah, so the midterms, you're going to be able to write them wherever you want. The midterms are always going to be on eClass no matter what, just to avoid switching back and forth. So if you wanted to bring your laptop to class and write in class, if we're allowed in class, so be it. Otherwise, you can write anytime at home. But yeah, so all of that information is going to be there for you guys. And I think I hit everything. So I got the eClass, I got the slides, I did the syllabus. I think we're good. Does anybody have any questions or anything that I might have missed or that needs a little bit more clarification? And I might have mentioned this earlier, but again, a little bit forgetful, so I may not have. I'm recording this session so that I have like my own screen capture and I'll have my audio. So I'm going to post that onto eClass. So if, say, next week you're like, hey, what did she say about this thing or that thing or where to find this? You can actually go back and rewatch this. So that way you're not missing out on any information, or if you came in late, you didn't have to miss the beginning. I'm just going to post it and then we'll be fine that way. Yeah, so we'll be doing these little Zoom meetings. You don't have to come. You are more than welcome to come. You can have questions about topics. You might have questions about academia in general. You might just show up if you want to see what questions other people have. That's all perfectly fine. And then I'll keep you guys updated as the university lets us know what we're doing next. But for now, this seems to be where we're going to settle, at least for the next couple of weeks. And I'll try and post our lecture videos sort of as far in advance as I can. I just want to make sure that everything is accurate before I set it loose, but I'll give you guys as much time with it as I can.